Welcome back to Of Olive Oil and Honey. My name is Ashley, and today's video is a part of my Set a Guard series where we're learning to better tame our tongue. And I specifically wanted to address gracious speech or gracious words. And there's one main anchor verse for this video, but I do have another verse that I will be tying in. And that verse is Colossians 4:6. Now, this verse is actually one of the first verses I was able to intentionally memorize some years ago, kind of earlier in my walk, and it's kind of random, but there was a reason why I decided to memorize it, put it to memory, is because I am from the north, my parents are from the north, my cousins, aunties, uncles, we're all from the north, right? And we are just more blunt and direct in our speech. And I grew up in the south, and blunt direct speech doesn't go over as well. So I had to learn over time, and I'm still in the process of learning, but I've gotten much better to soften how I deliver a message. And I was the person that believed it was better to tell truth no matter how it was wrapped, because I was telling the truth. And I learned there's a way to give truth in a loving and gracious way. You don't have to just deliver like, well, this is the truth, so just deal with it. So I would meditate on this verse, and depending on your translation, the wording might vary just a little bit, but this is how I memorized it. May your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each one. I think in ESV it says, let your speech be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each one. But I want to also just read this verse in context, because I think in general that's a great verse to apply to just anytime we're speaking, right? But Paul had a purpose for this verse. And so I'm going to read chapter 4, starting in verse 2. Continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Meanwhile, praying also for us that God would open to us a door for the word, to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in chains, that I may make it manifest as I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So in this instance, when I read this, Paul is telling them to the Colossians, I guess you would have called them, to continue in prayer, be vigilant in thanksgiving. So like using their words to pray, to give thanks, to pray for him, that God will open a door for them to be able to share the gospel, or as he says, to speak the mystery of Christ, to walk in wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. And then that's when he says that verse. And so I think that it's important for us to be mindful and kind with our speech in all circumstances, of course, but especially with those who are outside of the faith, because we're serving as representatives of Christ. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be won over by someone that's beating me with the Bible, that's being condescending. But if we're supposed to be pulling from the attributes of God, where it says God is love, God is peace, he is our joy, like we want to be that same representative to someone. And we have to walk in wisdom in how to convey that speech. But I also wanted to share a verse in Proverbs. It's one of my favorites that I also often think of, as Proverbs 16:24. Let me head there. Almost there. Here we go. Again, Proverbs 16:24, pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones. And so I don't know about you, but I eat honey almost every day, mainly because yes, it is a sweetening type of flavor to my yogurt, but I love it because of its natural healing property. Like, it's genuinely good for the human body. And people would also use honey to apply on wounds or injuries, because it has like actual healing properties where it would quicken the healing time for that wound. But what I guess Solomon is saying in this, and I'm assuming Solomon wrote this proverb, is that when we speak pleasant words, it's being compared to a honeycomb. Like, it's sweet, but it also has healing properties. It gives life. It's sweet to the soul and health to the bones. And so likewise with Paul in Colossians 4, he's saying, may your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt. And when I think about salt, I think of how it preserves. So ancients have always seasoned or like put salt on their meats and other things to help preserve it, so that they would be able to use it in the future. And so our words, I mean, we know that verse that says life and death are in the power of the tongue. And so we have the ability to use our words to just breathe life onto people, especially if we are, as Paul says, walking in wisdom and just trying to share God's wisdom with other people. We're encouraging people with his wisdom, with his word that also gives life. We're encouraging them by saying something kind, giving them a compliment, just trying to encourage them whenever they're going through a hard day or a hard circumstance. Just trying to be mindful of the power that our words have and the influence that we can have on someone's day or someone's entire life. Because I know that for me, I mean, I can think of back when I was a child, some of the things that those kids would say to me that I still remember to this day. And there's this, I can't remember what the quote is exactly, but it talks about how physical wounds can actually heal, but it's the words that we remember for the rest of our lives, you know? Gracious words have not only an emotional benefit, but a spiritual benefit as well. On the contrary, I wanted to share an example of a tool in speech, especially in the Western world, that does the complete opposite. So I don't know about you, but in my country, I live in the US, right? Sarcasm is huge. And I think a big reason why is because we're so influenced by ancient Greek literature, which sarcasm essentially stems from that. But the Oxford definition is the use of irony to mock or convey contempt. And I wanted to give a little brief language history on it. So it stems from sarcasmos, I think. And that word actually stems from another word called sarkazein, which means to tear flesh. And I saw other references basically translating it to like dogs pulling apart flesh. I've also seen gnashing teeth or something like that, which I couldn't help but think about. I think it's in Revelation, and I think it's throughout the Gospels where Jesus is kind of defining what hell looks like. And he says there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So when I read gnashing teeth, I was like, ooh, like that dark imagery came to mind. And I heard someone say, because I was just watching all these random videos on sarcasm, kind of weird, but they said it adds a dash of flavor to a conversation. And I thought, wow, that's crazy, because we're thinking about like honey and salt with gracious speech and gracious words, but then we have sarcasm, which adds this like dark element, this dark flavor to a conversation. I mean, literally, listen to this. I learned that it is also related to the word sarcophagus, which essentially means like a limestone tomb where they would put people in. And the idea was that the limestone was flesh eating, like that stone literally, I guess, breaks down human flesh, and how it's just so verbally aggressive, it's mocking. I love how someone described this as deception wrapped in truth. A sword dipped in honey is flattering words. I think that might actually be a biblical proverb, because that sounds really familiar, but they might have just like sprinkled that in there. But I just thought, wow, that's crazy. So yeah, I just really wanted to make this video to just try and encourage people to be as gracious with their speech as they can, even if you're having a bad day, trying to take the time and even just being gracious to yourself. Like, I know for myself, I grew up really beating on myself if I did something like, oh, you're so stupid, like just so mean to my own self. But I would be quicker to be able to give grace to other people and not grace to myself. So even being gracious with yourself is so important, and just trying to encourage people to eliminate sarcasm from their language. Because I know, again, it's seen as this like highly intelligent language tool that only intelligent, witty people can implement very cleverly into their conversation, but it's just mean at the end of the day. Because when we hear sarcasm, it's like it's being used in a way to be like slightly condescending, but in a deceptive way. Because usually when people are delivering a sarcastic remark, it's done with like a smirk on the face, kind of like haughty, you know? So yeah, that was the heart behind creating this video, and it is, again, correlated to the book that I am still working through, you guys. My goodness gracious, it's been months, and it makes absolutely no sense, but God is doing a work in me, and I'm actually glad that I'm taking my time through this book, because I feel like I'm much more conscientious of my speech now. I'm not just rushing through the book. But the author, Tim Cameron, is basically highlighting, I think, 7 things in total. Eliminating negativity, complaining, and sarcasm was one of them. So I was really surprised initially reading this book to see that, and now I see why. So I just wanted to kind of share some of that knowledge with you and just encourage you to be more gracious with your speech. And yeah, I think that's all I got for this video. So thank you so much for tuning in. I pray that I will see you in the next one, and I pray that it blessed you. Bye.